Hi, welcome again to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice, and we have a double header today. We have two fine poets. We're going to speak with Susan Goyette and then Phil Thompson. And first up today is Sue Goyette. Hi, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You were also shortlisted for the Governor General's Award. I should also mention that.
Yeah, I was.
So that makes you like a very official kind of Canadian poet.
I guess.
There you are. Many of your poems are about moments of clarity and realization.
Yeah.
Now, is that something that you go looking for in life to adapt into poetry?
Oh, I think those kind of moments are the moments that find you. And I think just as a writer, I just try to record them. So I don't think that I look for them. I think when I'm in them, I kind of try and seize them.
But you're ready and looking for them to happen, or you're just, you know, they're going to happen to you.
Right.
But you keep your mind open, and
Absolutely.
you're going to take some notes or something after they happen.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what being a writer is. I think we're the recorder of those moments, and when those moments aren't around, we write about the anticipation or longing of those moments. Those moments make us what we are, human and in love and wild and wacky.
Are there enough of those moments to go around?
No. No, I don't think, and I think that's where the melancholy and longing is in the human experience.
Interesting.
I think we're either constantly grieving or waiting, and then those moments happen, and then as soon as you name it, it's
Do you have a
gone.
word for that? Do you use epiphany, or do you use something else?
No, I don't even know if I want to name it. I don't want to cage it. It's just that thing, and when I'm in it, could be anywhere, could be with anyone. I just know it. I recognize it. I touch noses with it, and then I run home and write about it.
Yeah, and we read about it, of course, when we pick up your book. Take that just a little bit further into a kind of a personal definition of what a good poem is.
Oh, I don't know. Okay, I've just been reading a lot of good poems, and I think what I recognized was that something happens between the words and the lines that instinctively heads to your heart. And I don't know if it's bird-like or if it's prayer-like, but all of a sudden, without knowing, and you can look behind you and think, how did that happen? But the spirit of the combination of words and gesture and metaphor heads straight for your heart, and you've been seized by it.
You mentioned birds. The title of your
do.
book is The True Name of Birds. How do birds figure into there?
I don't know. I think birds come close for me. I think birds, when I see birds, I remember being out west. I did a writing thing out west, a nature writing workshop, and I had one of those moments where I was just watching a pelican, and it just made my knees give. And I think that's poems. I don't know. It's just that pull. And birds, to me, always seem to. I can equate it. It's like algebra equals something.
A very primary connection.
Yes.
Here's one of those kind of questions that people ask published writers. Do you remember your first poem that you wrote?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, you do?
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
remember mine. What was yours?
Mine was a rant against some guy who dumped me for my best friend.
So then you weren't like 6 years old when you were writing
No,
this.
I wish I was. I'm so envious of those people who wrote in the womb, you know. No,
Yeah.
I wrote when I was 14 and full of that wonderful teenage angst and Mickeys of Southern Comfort, and I just wrote those wild poems. And luckily I had an English teacher who read the poem and told me I was good. And it wasn't really the poem that I listened to, it was the word good, and I thought, I'm good at something, I'm going to keep doing it.
Could you read us a poem from the person that you are now, rather than the 14-year-old that you were back then? In other words, something from your book.
Yeah, right now?
Okay.
Yeah, I thought I'd read the moon on Friday night. The moon on Friday night erased all paths to Saturday and swept up footsteps from the day before. It coaxed buttons to the lips of buttonholes and whispered, "You're beautiful, so beautiful," to women who speak the vernacular of loneliness. Softly it slid into the hands of the men they were with and lent its light to everything they touched. "See," the moonlight seemed to say, "there are so many ways to be naked, and so many ways to be far from home." The light reminded the women of songs they knew, songs written to gauge distance. Later, still later on this island of Friday night, they sang those songs under their breath as they bent to tie their shoes. And they stayed bent long after their shoes were tied, hearing the wind for the first time caught in a bucket of baby teeth. It was then they remembered they were tooth fairies, medicine men, and their children's mouths were empty. They knew of light switches, window blinds. They knew to throw sand on fire, to blow at a candle. But this light they knew nothing about, so they carried it home with them, and now they wish they hadn't. It lights up corners they'd kept dark, lights their words and gives them new meaning. At night, They hold their husbands' hands to their mouths. Know this light, they pray. Touch me with this light.
Thank you for that. That's Susan Goyette reading from her book, The True Names of Birds. And we know that there are thousands of viewers out there going through the TV dials, looking for poetry and not finding it, and aha, success. They found
Shazam, here we are,
live
yeah.
poetry here on our show. A number of your poems are also about mothers and daughters and those kinds of relationships. How do you deal with the public-private issues that go along with that when writing poetry?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I do write about my kids a lot. And a couple of years ago, my daughter, Robin, said, just stop writing about me. And I said, okay. I said, do you want me to stop writing about you, or do you want me to stop reading them? And she said, stop reading them. So I continued writing about them. I totally respected that. My son's completely different. He kind of waltzes by me and say, write about this, look what I'm doing. So different personalities. I respected Robin not being she didn't want me to read about her until I wrote a poem about how she learned how to play poker last summer, and that she beat everyone that walked into my house. And I asked her if I could read that, and I did. She said yes, so I did. And everyone went up to her after the reading and said, wow, you must be really good at cards. And then it was
fame.
Yeah.
See
See
fame
that?
goes along
Yeah,
with it. Yeah,
she liked that.
All right. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in St. Bruno, Quebec, on the South Shore of Montreal.
Did that influence you in some ways?
I think so. I think I'm just realizing how it influenced me. I think it influenced me because it was a French-English society. There were a lot of divisions. There was a mountain and lots of lakes. I lived outside a lot. I was outside a lot as a teenager. I hung out with French and English people. It was a wonderful experience. Language was really important.
And that nature connection that so many poets keep coming back to. Here we are in the urban world, the multimedia world, and yet, you know, writers are still going back and looking at sunsets and birds and trees and grass growing in the lawn. Why is that?
Oh, because it has it. It has that thing we're all searching for. It's something we can't control. It's there. When I was at that wilderness workshop, I would sit in a meadow, and I realized, like, I'm going to leave in a week, and that meadow is still going to be there. And that filled me with something. And I think it's that connection. We want to be part of it, and we know we can't, and we are part of it. And it's one of those sweet and sour deals. I don't know.
You know, you seem like a very cheerful person, yet I find a lot of sadness in your poetry. Why that paradox?
I don't know if I'm cheerful. That's kind. Yeah, I'm cheerful. I think humor is an important. I think humor is just my form of shyness, and I think my poems, I've taken off the cloak of that kind of distancing, and you see the real me.
Yes. The persona that's in your poem, is that the I that is you? When you say I in a poem, is that really you?
It's a combination. It starts as being me, but I think there's something that happens magical, lyrical between me and my poem, and it becomes its own thing. Sometimes I don't recognize myself in my work, and I think that's good.
Now, that first book was shortlisted for Governor General's Award, and it was your first book, right?
Yeah, it was my
very first
book.
one.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Getting
that was weird. I don't know if I liked that. I mean,
I wondered if you'd say that.
Yeah, I mean, it was great for the press. I was happy for Brick Books. They had 3 books on the shortlist. I think that's really good for a small press. It was very strange because people were talking about my book in a way that I wasn't accustomed. They were defining it, and for a while I thought they were carving a space that my work they thought should fill. And that frightened me as an artist because I was worried that I'd feel compelled to fill that space, and I didn't want to have that. So I stopped writing poems for a while and started writing fiction. And now I'm lured back to poems, though. I think I'll be writing poems.
Right, back to the first love. Can poems do practical tasks, though? We think of nonfiction writing and, you know, people writing how-to books or something like that. Does poetry ever become practical?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think poetry is our real guide. When I read a good poem, I feel like I've been nudged back on track again. I think, yeah, it's when you're talking to somebody, and I don't want to say that cliche soul to soul, but you're talking deep, and I think that's the guide, that's it. So I guess I'm totally in love with poems.
And it's useful. One of your poems concerns your grandmother talking about her cremation while you're sitting in a restaurant in Howard Johnson's, and she says something about she wants her ashes scattered on the Trans-Canada Highway. Perhaps you could explain.
Well, that is lifted. That absolutely happened. We were on St. Catherine Street. We would meet once a week for lunch, and she was one of those wonderfully eccentric women in my life who smoked long Benson and Hedges cigarettes and talked kind of like Betty Davis, and would stuff her half-eaten Cornish hen in her purse when she couldn't finish it, and brought up the fact that she wanted her ashes flung on the Trans-Canada Highway. And of course I said, you betcha.
Did Did it happen?
No,
Oh.
it didn't happen. We had the family meeting and all the, the elders said, oh, we can't do that. And I only had this poem as proof, but she wanted it. And
It
they
might
said,
even be illegal or something.
it is. Someone
Is it really?
pointed that
I bet it
out,
is.
and I thought, you're just not drinking enough. So what I did was, I've been reading a lot, and I've managed to read that poem in pretty well every province in Canada, and that was kind of my...
And everyone will remember that image.
That's
Everyone.
right, and that's kind of how I dealt with it.
You talk to your neighbors about poetry?
Yeah, I do. I live across the street from the school my kids go to, and I go over sometimes, and when I'm just all filled with something I just wrote, they hear it. And I just finished writing a novel, and somebody across the street said, you mean we have to read a novel now? Because these people don't really read a lot, my neighbors, so it's really interesting.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I find that too. People like things that are short. Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
really short
but
book.
a
I
novel.
can read that. I think we have time maybe for one more poem. Do you have another poem, a short poem?
Yeah.
That you'd be willing to share for us, something from your book, The True Name.
Why don't I read the title poem, because it's kind of
Birds.
short. Yeah.
That's right. Good, the title poem.
Yeah, The True Names of Birds. There are more ways to abandon a child than to leave them at the mouth of the woods. Sometimes by the time you find them, they've made up names for all the birds and constellations, and they've broken their reflections in the lake with sticks. With my daughter came promises and vows that unfolded through time like a road map and led me to myself as a child, filled with wonder for my father who could make sound from a wide blade of grass and his breath. Here in the stillness of forest, the sun columning before me, temple ancient. That wonder is what I regret losing most. That wonder and the true names of birds.
That's Susan Goyette. Where's your writing headed?
Oh, hopefully to the wilderness. I don't know. I don't really want to know. Just where it takes me.
But you're writing fiction too now.
No,
as
I
well as poetry.
just finished writing a novel. I'm being lured to poetry. I think I'm going to be writing poems. Poems are in my head now.
Did you like the feeling of the landscape of fiction as opposed to the liberty and the length as opposed to the brevity?
I did. I liked the combination. I liked bringing some of my poetic attention, or whatever you want to call it, to fiction. I had a really good time writing fiction. I tried to write the story with poetry, and it wasn't succeeding. There was something missing, and what I realized was the poems that I'd written became kind of the structure for the novel. They were the floor plans, and they kept reappearing in the fiction.
Yes.
So that was really interesting for me.
The critics often they like this thing of, oh, the poet is now writing the novel, and so the novel will be more poetic, and there's learning and crossover. Oh, you don't like that?
Well, I don't know if I like that. I think I'm just who I am, and I think hopefully when I'm in Sobeys I'll say something poetic, and that I just will be me. And I think when I'm being the true me, then it'll be successful, because that's all I can do.
What, like, for example, in Sobeys, what would you say? How much is the radicchio to you?
Yeah,
is the poetic
or
thing?
broccoli spears. Broccoli spears. We must eat broccoli spears, just for the sound of it.
They'll love you in Sobeys for that. Favorite poets?
Oh, right now, Canadian.
Yeah.
Helen Humphreys, Ken Babstock. Who else am I reading? I'm reading Paul Celan. I'm reading a lot of American, Jane Mead, Billy Collins. But Canadian, Helen Humphreys' book Anthem just won the CAA. It's a fine book of poems. Ken Babstock just won the Atlantic. Mean, a wonderful book.
There they are, other famous Canadian poets. We're going to take a short break right now. My guest has been Susan Goyette. We're going to be back with Phil Thompson right after this. Welcome back to Off the Page. My second guest today is poet Phil Thompson. He lives on Salt Marsh Island in the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you.
Phil's book is called All the Other Phil Thompsons Are Dead. Whew, heavy-duty title. Tell me about where you live first.
Well, I live on an island that's been in my family for over 200 years, and my grandfather left it to me because he trusted me never to sell it. And because of that, after I worked up north for about 5 years, I decided, well, I might as well build on it. If I can't sell it, I might as well at least have a free place to live. So
There are no causeways, no bridges.
no, I have to row. Yeah, good shape for an old guy there.
No power lines going out to the homestead.
No, solar and wind generator, just a small system, and solar-powered laptop and cell phone, and it's a beautiful place to write.
So yeah, how does that work together? The poet living on the island, somewhere on the coast of Nova Scotia. Boy, that sounds pretty romantic.
It sounds romantic, except I'm hauling my own water. Last year I sold my chainsaw, so for the first winter in my life I did the Zen firewood walk with my bow saw and actually sawed all my firewood by hand.
No
So,
machines.
no, and that was a wonderful experience. I find you cut smaller and smaller trees. It's quite interesting. You know? And meanwhile, in the mainland, I can hear clear cutting and big dinosaur machines. So it was really neat because when you're using a chainsaw yourself, you can't hear that going on in the distance. So it was a moving experience.
You have a pretty personal connection to the environment, to the island, to the inlet, and,
Yes.
and the sea.
Yeah, been going there since I was 2. Right?
Does that shape some of the poems that you write?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, yeah.
Your poetry book evolved over a long apprenticeship, as they say.
Well, 30 years. Well, my publisher said I get 1 book per millennium.
Yeah.
So then the next book will probably be Phil Thompson is finally dead. You know, it'll be posthumous. Yeah.
Who knows? You might live a long time. You have a very pure lifestyle out there. You know, you're not tapped into the power grid or any of those things. Why is it that you believe in poetry?
It's, I guess I was kind of born with it. Unlike Sue, I started writing very young. I think I must have been encouraged by my parents and my grandparents. Yeah,
Do you remember your first poem?
I remember the first poem I got detention for in grade 6, a Halloween poem. You know, I do. And my mother had to march into school and say, no, he really wrote it. And so I actually got into trouble for my first poem. Yeah.
Because I thought you had filched it from someplace else.
Yep. And Mom said, well, show me the book.
Yeah. Evidence. Good defense of her son. The poetry that you write now, what do you think a poem should do?
Well, I like clarity. Not everyone agrees with me, of course. I used to write really sort of imitating, you know, romantic poets when I was a teenager, and I really like clarity now and simplicity. I spend a lot of time sculpting poems, so the poems I prefer are the poems that have been clearly sculpted. There are no wasted words, where there's a sense of rhythm, and you're touched by the images somehow. There's a resonance. But that's always what I do. In fact, Eli Mandel in about 1984 once told me, "You are a wonderful poetry editor," and this is over a beer. "It's time to apply the skill to your own work."
Oh, that's an interesting kind of
What a
comment,
wonderful,
criticism, advice,
friendly
all-
thing to
all
say. Yeah,
together.
and because I had never applied my editing skills to my own work,
Yes.
so they've gotten better ever since. God bless them.
Yes, indeed they have.
Yeah.
Perhaps you could read one of the poems from your book. This is Phil Thompson.
Well,
His book is All the Other Phil Thompsons Are Dead.
I could read the title poem.
Pick anything.
But I think probably just to tell the story about one of the reasons why I like, you just never know what's going to happen when you write poetry. You remember in 1972, the incident with the bridge, you know, the Pathfinder poem? You published it in 1979
Yes, I did in a magazine.
in Pottersfield Portfolio.
Goes way, way back.
And then in the 80s, a composer read it, set it to music. In 1995, I get a phone call, "Are you Phil Thompson?" "Oh, yeah. "Can I use your words?" "Oh, yeah." And I get to listen to a 20-voice choir and a full orchestra do this poem.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's called the
Pathfinder. Yeah. So I'd like to read that one. It's a true story. Pathfinder. Hitchhiking back to the city, December, almost sundown, traffic too neurotic near the bridge, so I walk the catwalk where someone else has gone before. Deep in the ice-crusted snow, his footprints are dark holes I plunge my feet into for easier walking. The wind blows hard and cold, nearly drowns the sounds of cars. I tighten my hood to look down at the river, which seems too far below for even summer swan dives. Halfway across, the footprints end, beside a pile of clothes. Frigid from the morning rain, they are rigidly stacked like plywood on steel. Vision blurs at the loss of my companion, tears freeze in the wind. Was he really a stranger? Although not a Christian, I carve a cross on the crusted snow and observe a moment of silence at 10 below. On the way to the police station, it is much harder to walk without his footprints.
That's a very haunting image. Very tragic poem, very Canadian poem too somehow. All that package rolled together. Like Alden Nolan, your poetry leans toward being anecdotal, which means that there's often a story, as in that poem, involved. Why do you think that works well in poetry?
Well, if you like stories in poems, it works well. I do. Not everyone does.
Yeah.
They tend to tell some sort of a story, but somehow clarify and focus the story into I've always tried to write clearer language, clearer rhythmic language that you know, and that has all of the multiple ambiguity meanings of single words that really can capture a reader and tell the story so that they can translate it into their own, what the words mean to them and their own images. So for me, the story it links it more to a moment in the path of life.
And it seems to be almost part of that tradition. You're interested in tradition and history, and the storytelling that goes along with a maritime life and maritime culture, like the kind of stories people tell to each other on ships or when they come ashore, that sort of thing. Do you still feel like you're part of that tradition somehow? The seagoing tradition that comes from your family?
It's very much linked in my blood, I guess. All the stories of the master mariners, and you know, and I had to go to sea myself to see what it was like as a fisheries observer. That was a wonderful experience. I found out indeed I never get seasick. I sure got scared a few times.
You've also spent some time living up north.
Yes.
Up way north, Northwest Territories. How did that change you?
Well, one of the wonderful things about the North, for me, is that there are all kinds of really talented people who have decided to go away from, you know, the urban band of, you know, the part of Canada that's nuzzled up against the U.S. and actually be out in the wilderness. And often they're multi-talented. You know, you'd see a banker in a three-piece suit, and that night he'd be playing dynamite, jazz, you know, dressed a little differently. There were very many multiply talented people, including, I think the best thing for me was that because of the nature of my work, I worked with a lot of native tradesmen and became close friends with them. And they traveled with me, and they would take me to the graveyards where all of their friends were buried by the time they were 25, and this was why they quit drinking. You know, I mean, really soulful experiences that I'll never forget. It was a real honor to work with them.
So you brought that back from the north. You came back to the Maritimes to live on your island. Do you feel like a spiritual tie with the place that you live? Could you describe that?
Well, it's I think we know the island was used by the Mi'kmaq for years, so there's that sense of old use. And most of the view until the clear cutting began was the same for the last 10,000 years. You know, from it was just a wonderful view. I think it's certainly not haunted because it's a new house, but there's a sense of a link to songwriting. I mean, there's an old story that the land grant was actually given because one of my ancestors, George Bayer, sang a song at court for the Duke of Kent, and in return he was given the land grant that the island is part of.
Oh, that's a pretty good deal.
From the island. So the island was gotten for a song. 200 years ago, over 200 years ago. And from the island, from my house, I can see the old house where the lady who wrote the song Farewell to Nova Scotia lived when she wrote the song. So there's and Helen Creighton has documented this incredible, but a quarter of her book on folk songs comes from Pepeswick.
And that's where you are today,
so there's
the
a real,
poet on the island.
There's a real tradition.
We're going to take a short break and come back with Phil Thompson right after this. We've been talking with Phil Thompson today and his poetry in the book All the Other Phil Thompsons Are Dead. You seem to have a kind of longing for some things from the past. What is it that we're losing out on now?
It's a wonderful retreat for my sons and my friends to come and just slow the pace down, be thoughtful, have time to speak with each other. There's that sense of retreat, protection. It's not totally isolated. It is part of a community, but the water defines a border.
Sounds like an idyllic environment. Phil, thanks for coming on the show and joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for watching Off the Page. I'll see you again next time.